In this lesson, we're going to discuss naming acids. At the end of this video lesson, you should be able to write names and formulas of acids. Acids are substances containing hydrogen ions that are paired to anions. This means that acids are treated as ionic compounds in such a way that the hydrogen ion forms compounds with anions. The names for acids will depend on the suffixes of the anions. Since we have discussed 3 suffixes for anions, we also have 3 rules or patterns for acid names. If the anion suffix is "ide", the prefix hydro and suffix "ic" acid will be attached to the root. If the anion suffix is "ate", the suffix "ic" acid will be attached to the root. And lastly, if the anion is "ite", the suffix "us" acid will be attached to the root. Let us first look at some examples of naming acids. To clearly see the difference between the rules, we are going to use the acids formed by chlorine. We have HCl, HClO3, and HClO2. Since we treat their acid formation as an ionic compound, it will be of big help if we identify the ions present. For HCl, the ions present are hydrogen ion and chloride ion. For HClO3, the ion is ClO3 or chlorate ion. And for HClO2, the anion is ClO2 or chloride ion. Following our rules, since chloride ends with suffix "ide", the prefix hydro and suffix "ic" acid will be attached to the root chlor. For chlorate, the suffix "ic" acid will be attached to chlor. And lastly, for chlorite, the suffix "us" acid will be attached to chlor. Therefore, we have hydrochloric acid for HCl, chloric acid for HClO3, and chlorous acid for HClO2. Now, let's do this the other way around. We're going to write the formula of the acid when the name is given. We have sulfuric acid, sulfurous acid, and hydrosulfuric acid. Again, a requirement for acids is that they should have hydrogen ion. For us to be guided with what an ion should be expected, let us first identify the required suffix. For sulfuric acid, since the acid has a suffix of "ic" acid but without a prefix, the anion suffix should be "ate". Therefore, the anion should be sulfate. For sulfurous acid, since the acid has a suffix of "us" acid, the anion suffix should be "ite". Therefore, the anion should be sulfite. And lastly, for hydrosulfuric acid, since the acid has a prefix of hydro and a suffix of "ic" acid, the anion suffix should be "ide". Therefore, the anion should be sulfide. Now, let us write the formulas for the following ions. For sulfate, this is SO sub 4 with a charge of -2. We are going to do a crisscross with the charges to get H2SO4. For sulfite, since this is 1 less oxygen than sulfate, this will be SO sub 3 with a charge of -2. After a crisscross of charges, this will be H2SO3. And lastly, for hydrosulfuric acid, sulfide is the monoatomic sulfur ion which has a -2 charge. Therefore, the formula is H sub 2S. And these are examples for naming acids. To conclude this lesson, let's review the following key points. The naming of acids depend on the suffix of the anion paired with the hydrogen ion. If the anion of the acid does not contain an oxygen, the anion root will be attached to the prefix hydro and the suffix "ic" acid. And lastly, if the anion of the acid contains an oxygen, the suffix "us" acid will be used for anions ending in "ite", and the suffix "ic" acid will be used for anions ending in "ate". And that ends our discussion on naming acids.